Good afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, from Arcadian Court in downtown Toronto, welcome to the Empire Club of Canada. For those of you just joining us through either our webcast or our podcast, welcome to the meeting. Today we present the Honourable Catherine McKenna in conversation with Tom Clark. We live in a sensitive time, in a divisive world experiencing unprecedented change, facing many defining issues as a country and a continent. There are tensions on trade with the U.S., disagreements on pipelines in Canada. But who would have guessed the most divisive word one can use is carbon, or should I say, putting a price on pollution. The differences between the approach to climate change are stark, and the debate has been intense. Where many federal and provincial leaders are divided in their championing of very different approaches to reducing greenhouse gas. The Empire Club has been at the forefront of the greatest debates influencing Canadians since 1903, and here we are again. As with countless other national debates of this magnitude, the Empire Club remains committed to offering its podium to different points of view to foster meaningful and engaging dialogue. This is why we have Minister McKenna speaking here today. And Minister, we appreciate you choosing our podium at such an important time. And that's also why we had recently welcomed the Honourable Rod Phillips, Ontario's Minister of Environment. Presumably you're going to say slightly different things than him today, and that's why the audience is here. I'm sure you're all aware that the National Climate Change Plan developed by Catherine McKenna includes provisions to implement a federal solution in each province that has not met certain criteria. And those provinces are Ontario, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and New Brunswick. Minister, you probably wouldn't be surprised to learn that Ontario's Environment Minister has made some comments on your plan here at the Empire Club. He focused on why the new provincial government chose to overturn the former government's cap-and-trade system, why the Ontario government disagrees with the federal criteria, and why his government fundamentally opposed a plan for Ottawa to proceed with the carbon tax in Ontario and the other affected provinces, describing the federal solution as dogmatic. I think this might be one of those places that you will disagree. Minister McKenna has been busy in the last few weeks coming forward with a two-part announcement specifying the pricing for carbon in each of the 4 affected provinces, and committing the federal government to a tax rebate for all taxpayers in those jurisdictions, where each taxpayer's annual rebate would come out higher than the carbon taxes accumulated. Also last week, the Ontario provincial government released details of their Made in Ontario plan, committing to $400 million in government funding to develop clean tech with the private sector. To that, Minister McKenna's strongly worded response was, quote, "They're going backwards on climate change, that they're making it free to pollute," unquote. Of course, as residents of Ontario, we are all interested in the dynamics of how everything's playing out, and everyone is always mesmerized with the political intrigue of how our leaders are getting along. But as Canadians and citizens of the world, we have to recognize the bigger picture and understand how great this responsibility is. Just yesterday, Prime Minister Mulroney offered praise in eulogy to President George H.W. Bush on how a 1980s bilateral agreement on acid rain was, quote, "a splendid gift for future generations of Americans and Canadians to savor," unquote. Acid rain was the bilateral issue of the day. While climate change is the global issue of today, Minister McKenna has a responsibility to all Canadians of every province to represent us on the international stage, with governments around the world collaborating to address the problem. And that is why we asked her to speak at the Empire Club today. Minister McKenna is on her way to COP24 conference in Poland. So, Minister, you have a very challenging job, and not just for the obvious reasons. Many prominent ministers of political stripes have held the environment portfolio before you. But you are the first to hold the portfolio of the environment and climate change, an important distinction. And arguably your government, particularly you as minister, have raised the profile of climate change in an unprecedented way, truly placing it at the front and center of our national discourse. And for that, you should be recognized appropriately. So let's do it. To moderate the discussion on all this, we brought in the big guns, an individual who has almost 45 years at most senior levels of Canadian journalism, including as Global TV's chief political correspondent and host of the West Block. He actually only works at companies called Global. He has Global TV, Global Public. I think we should get him a gig at Global Affairs it'll work out. He has interviewed every Canadian Prime Minister since John A. Macdonald. Sorry, it says here Lester B. Pearson. That's Lester B. Pearson, and has covered every federal election campaign since 1974. He has reported in active war zones from over 33 countries. One of those war zones was moderating Empire Club evening debates. This is how we know and love Tom at the Empire Club of Canada. He has the ability to deal with important topics in a way, and treating them seriously while also having a bit of fun, and that's why we love Tom. He has a deep understanding of Canadians' position in an increasingly complicated international dynamic. He has won enough Lifetime Achievement Awards for several lives and has been named one of the most influential journalists in Ottawa. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage a man who needs no introduction, the Chairman of Global Public Affairs, award-winning journalist Tom Clark. And our keynote speaker was elected the first female member of Parliament in Ottawa in 2015. She was immediately promoted to cabinet in the new government of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Her first piece of business was substantial, having responsibility for negotiating the Paris Agreement. She secured Canada's first ever plan with the provinces, territories, and Indigenous peoples to address climate change and grow a clean economy. Before entering politics, Catherine practiced trade law with leading firms in Canada and Indonesia, and was a senior negotiator at the United Nations Peacekeeping Mission on the Timor Sea Treaty. She co-founded Level Justice, a charity that levels the playing field and increases access to justice for marginalized communities worldwide. She served as the executive director of the Banff Forum, a public policy organization for young leaders. She taught at the Munk School of Global Affairs. Catherine is a graduate of the University of Toronto and the London School of Economics, also McGill Law School, and is called to the bar of Ontario and New York State. Catherine and her husband live in Ottawa with her 3 children and their dog Skokie. During her free time, she can be found in the water, swimming, canoeing, or kayaking. Please welcome to the stage Canada's Minister of Environment and Climate Change, the Honourable Catherine McKenna.
All right, the big guns.
There we go. Well, thank you very much. And you know, as to that crack about, you know, I interviewed John A. Macdonald, you know, the first one to use that joke was Wilfrid Laurier. And so welcome. The one promise that we will make right off the bat is that at 1:30, you'll be walking out those doors. So relax. Considering everything that's going on, you're looking pretty good.
It's just big guns. It's very exciting to be here.
Well, the last time I saw you was in the Paris airport. You were at COP21, I think it was, the now famous Paris Accords. And I don't think it'd be an exaggeration to say that when you looked at me, I think the question you asked is, where am I? Which underlines one thing. And just before we get going on climate, I want to ask you this. So, you're in a job where you have to work anywhere on a good day, 12 hours, on a normal day, 16 to 18 hours. Your holidays are measured in hours, not in days and weeks. You work 6 to 7 days a week, sometimes 8. We know exactly how much you paid for your orange juice last week because it's in the public record. And on a really good day, only 60% of Canadians think that you are Satan. So
100% of my Twitter feed,
So how's this politics thing going for you?
Look, you know what? It's great. And I really mean that. And I look at John Wilkinson, who was former Minister of the Environment. I'm super honored to be in this job. That we live in a great country. And I am really proud to be doing a really important job in a really complex country. So the first ministers' meeting is happening tomorrow, and it's going to be sparky, I guess.
Well, they're already saying that they may walk out.
That's happened to me in meetings. No, look, it is a real honor. It is a challenging job, and you know, you never stop thinking about it. In the middle of the night, I will wake up, and I'll think, okay, so that one problem that we had, you know, what if we tried this differently? But, you know, the thing about my portfolio, and we'll probably get into this, is it's actually as much an economic portfolio as an environment portfolio. That there's an economic rationale for what we're trying to do. That in fact, if you don't take action on climate change, it's the biggest risk you could ever have. If you ran a business and you didn't think about the risks, or if you had a house and the ceiling is leaking and you didn't take action, that the impact is so huge. The thing is, I think the hardest thing about my job, beyond being away from my kids, is actually thinking about it really matters what we do right now. Like, it matters to all of us here. We've got a generation to take serious action, or else we will feel the huge impacts of climate change that we don't want to see. We don't want to see mass migrations. We don't want to see food shortages. We don't want to see our Arctic literally disappear. And we can take it, we can do it. And I'm looking at Tiff Macklem. He's on our Sustainable Finance Task Force. Luckily, we have the smartest people who are really helping us map this out. How do you get the environment and the economy to go together? How do you take advantage of the $26 trillion opportunity? Not coming from me, coming from our best expert, Mark Carney. And so there's this opportunity, but it's hard. And the politics, it's unfortunate that these issues that sadly should not be partisan issues, that we should be getting our act together as a country, that we should be really serious about tackling the biggest risk that we face, but also the biggest economic opportunity. And then we should be selling Canada, because the world needs more Canada. It does. And we can be model for what a natural resource-based economy, and we're broader than that, how you can transition and how you can do it in a way that you bring everyone together. I'm from the Hamilton. Like, people in Hamilton have to be part of this. People in Alberta in the energy sector have to be part of this. And we can figure it out. But I try to, like, I have a little button, my daughter's stolen it, but it's no drama. Like, I try to minimize the drama. There's a lot of drama going around, but sometimes that's hard, and it just stands in the way of progress.
Well, let's bring some drama into this, because you've been away from it too long. There's a lot going on. I mean, we've got COP24 taking place in Poland, as was mentioned. The United Nations has just come out with a study saying that the price on pollution should be closer to $300 a ton as opposed to the $30 to $50 that you're recommending. We've got another report out just 24 hours ago saying that there are more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere now than at any other time in human history. And that is an increase of almost 3% over last year. So despite all that's been going on, we are still headed in the wrong direction. But let's deal with all of that, but start here at home. You mentioned partisanship. This issue of how you price pollution or your approach to climate change has fractured the political landscape in this country, as it has in a couple of other countries, but I think particularly here. It's a divide that's not only seemingly generational, but it also seems to be geographical, east versus west to some degree. How do you take the partisanship out of this? And is it really, in the end, a zero-sum game?
Well, I mean, is it a zero-sum game if we don't take serious action on climate change? Yeah. So look, it's just that there's a basic principle that if it's free to pollute, there will be more pollution. That when you look at what we've seen works, so you can look at the example of British Columbia, look at the example of Quebec, look at the example of California, China now has a price on pollution, EU, that if you put a price on something you don't want, you're going to get less of it. But you also, the reason you put a price on pollution is also the innovation piece. That you talked about, or actually, it was the intro, talked about George Bush Sr. and Brian Mulroney. Acid rain was the biggest issue when I was growing up. Does anyone remember that? We were just worried what was going to happen to all our lakes. And it was a really tough issue. And
Ronald Reagan said it was because of bees.
Well, that's what I actually have a lot of conversations with Brian Mulroney. It might surprise folks. He and I we chat a lot. And I said to him, like, how do you deal with President Trump? But then it was just like, how do you convince people to do the right thing? And he said, he talked about Ronald Reagan. And so we're starting at a low base on this, what the problem was. And then it was really George Bush Sr. And George Bush Sr., people did not want to put a price on pollution to tackle acid rain. They didn't. There wasn't like a huge number of people jumping up and down for this. But they realized that this is what they needed to do. And guess what? And this was based on good science. You also need good science. We need to make decisions based on evidence and science. So they knew the science said we had to do something. They knew the evidence said putting a price on it would work. And guess what? They were able to reduce pollution faster and cheaper than ever before because people innovated. They found clean solutions. And those are clean solutions. When you find them, you can export them. And so that's the same logic behind putting a price on pollution. It is the most efficient way to reduce emissions, also to get the innovation we need. And I'm not doing this because I'm an ideologue. I'm doing this because it's practical. I'm a practical person. This is a policy that works. And when you say how high does the price have to go, we're doing a range of other measures. Affordability is huge. In my job, I have to be able to go talk to someone, in Hamilton and make sure I'm not going to say, that they aren't going to feel like they won't be able to go afford to have their kids go to after-school activities. That's not what I'm in the business of doing. The business of doing, making sure that the health benefits of climate action, that we know phased out coal. We went from over 50 smog days to 0, less hospital visits, less kids with asthma, huge savings on the health side, but that also life is affordable. So our climate action incentive, you can go to our website, but what we're doing is we're being very transparent. We're taking the revenues from pricing, all going back to Ontario, 90% are going back to people directly, and 10% are going to support small and medium-sized enterprises, municipalities, universities, schools, hospitals, Indigenous peoples. That's a smart approach. People will have more money in the pocket, but the incentive is still there, and people will choose clean solutions, and then we'll be creating even more jobs. That's the fastest growing sector, one of the fastest growing sectors. So I don't want fights. I'm not looking for fights. I want to fight climate change. I want to fight for more jobs. I want to fight for more investment. I want to fight for Canada being the model for the world about how you can transition to a cleaner economy while being in the, using the resources that we have. We were just talking about, I was talking to John from Goldcorp. I love, I find all these stories. Goldcorp is going to have the first underground electric mine. Guess what? That's an economic opportunity. They're going to find solutions that other companies can use. But also there was a health angle that I didn't even know. That it's cleaner, it's better. It's better for their employees. So there's a business case for all of this. There's a moral case. There's a health case. There's an economic case. And I just wish we could have those discussions. But look, I'm in politics. You know what? My dad's Irish, and I'm from the Hammer, so I am tough if I have to be. But we just have to get things done.
But let's look at what particularly the blue team is coming at you with, and we're in an election cycle now, and they've already sort of put the money down on saying what one of the big issues is going to be in this campaign, and it's going to be over pricing, pollution, carbon tax, call it what you will. One of their complaints, and you hear this particularly out west, people are saying, well, wait a minute, it's great that you're giving that money back to the residents of the province from which you take it, and more than they paid in. Got it. But what about the companies that have to pay? They're saying, look, that puts our companies, our industries at a competitive disadvantage because we're paying a tax or paying a price, however you want to term it, that hasn't existed before, and therefore it puts us further back in a competitive sense, especially in the North American market. What do you say to that?
Well, look, competitiveness is key. And that's why when I started this job, we created what's called the Carbon Pricing Leadership Coalition. I'm looking, many of the businesses represented here are members. And these are businesses that understand that you need certainty, that you need to use tools that make sense. Many companies already across the globe internally price carbon. It changes your decisions. You make cleaner decisions, also energy efficient decisions. But you need to do things in a smart way. So our approach with heavy emitters has been competitiveness up front. What do we want? We want everyone to have the incentive to choose cleaner solutions so we reduce emissions. With heavy emitters, we want to make sure that we create the incentive for them to be best in class, to be top in the world, but recognizing that they're competing in a global marketplace where there isn't a price of pollution across the board. That's how you do it, and it's a lot of hard work. We sit down sector by sector, understanding, what would be best in class, what does it mean to be trade exposed, and you can do this in a way that is thoughtful, in a way that makes sense. But the reality is the cost of inaction is so much greater than the cost of action, and businesses know this, that the risks, imagine the risks to your business. if we have, food shortages, we have mass migration, if we have floods, droughts, extreme heat this summer killed over 90 people that we know of. We don't keep the same stats in Ontario. There's huge costs. And we know the solutions. And that's the thing, we need to use the tools that we have that are smart, that always keep in mind life needs to be affordable for people. Everyone needs to be part of the solution. And as I say, I'm the Minister of Environment, as much for people in Alberta and that work in the oil sands as I am for people who live downtown Toronto. That's good. That's the way it should be. And we need to try to bring people together. So I actually spend a lot of time on policy. I'm a policy wonk, but I also spend a lot of time on comms. How do I talk like a normal person to people that are worried about climate change? Canadians are worried about climate change, but they're also worried about jobs. They're also worried about the economy. They're also worried about their kids. They're worried about their health. And so you have to pull all these pieces together, and you have to do it in very short ways, because it's good we have an audience here for a while, but often, I'm on Twitter, and you don't have a lot of time to get out your message. But look, I think it's actually Canadians are reasonable. Jean Chrétien said that to me. He's also served as a mentor. So Canadians are reasonable. Talk to them like reasonable people. Talk to them about the challenges and talk to them about the opportunities, and don't oversell what you're doing. Just be reasonable, and they are reasonable, and they will respect you for it.
I get two competing messages, though. I get one from you and your government, which basically, if I could encapsulate it, says, that environment and economy go hand in hand, and you can have progress on both. And it moves ahead. And then I listen to the United Nations and the climate change panel of the United Nations, who are saying that this is our last chance. We are the last generation that can actually mitigate this. We can't stop it, we can mitigate it. And the timelines are incredibly short. And I'm wondering whether politics gets in the way, because, let's face it, to implement the policies you want to implement, you've got to get elected. You're not going to get elected if you are going to be on the extreme. And yet, for a lot of people, and the messages that the world is getting right now, is that this is not a normal situation where we can have the solution without any pain and everybody's going to be just fine. How close are we really, worldwide, to sort of saying, okay, if we want to save our civilization, if we want to save humankind, we actually have to do something incredibly dramatic, and you know what? It's going to hurt like hell.
So I think, look, is the situation extremely serious? Yeah, we know that. The UN report laid it out. But you know what? This is a discussion. It's kind of weird when you go into my job, because you realize the same discussion has been happening for 40 years. That for too long, too many politicians have done too little. It's too politicized, too hard. Our timelines are too short. We got to get reelected. The first thing you need to do is have a plan. And then you have to implement your plan. And in the Paris Agreement context, you have to be more ambitious. Every 5 years, everyone has to go and be more ambitious. And then you have to look at what can you do. So we're doing internationally, we're also doing the Powering Past Coal Coalition. And there are other countries that seem to think there's going to be a renaissance of coal. There isn't. It's called cheap natural gas. But it is an opportunity to get countries to do what we're doing in Canada. Set a date for coal phase out that provides certainty for business, and figure out the transition. We have a just transition workforce, because you got to worry about communities, you got to worry about workers. We're doing that with the UK. Putting a price on pollution. 90%, our electricity is going to be, our goal is 90% renewables. Why am I telling you this? Because if every country in the world did this, which we can do, we would be in such a better place. But you have to start somewhere. And sure, people have called for my resignation. I was like, well, how's that going to help anyone? Thank you, David Suzuki. But the reality is, you got to put one foot in front of the other, and you got to demonstrate that you can do this. And I actually think the biggest opportunity, and we talk about it with the Sustainable Finance Task Force, it's just getting the money flowing. All of these are really important tools. But when you turn the billions to trillions, that's when you're going to see the acceleration. I'm also a realistic optimist. Some days I'm an optimistic realist. It just depends. But We can get this done, but we need the key tools. Putting a price on pollution is a key tool. We need to phase out coal. We need to invest in renewables. We have an infrastructure bank. We need to leverage private finance. There's all these things you can do. And so I think that sometimes you just have to, you can go from one side to the other. Don't do anything, too expensive. You don't care about people. Other side, do everything now, shut everything down. That is not where I'm at. That's not where Canadians are at. That's not realistic. One foot in front of the other. You got a plan, implement the plan. Do it like you would in a business. You have a plan, you implement your plan. You adjust if you have to adjust. Get more ambitious. You see the opportunity, continue driving. Get other people on board. They see the opportunity, the 20% tipping point. Everyone's going to get on board. But we got to be serious. And that's why, I'm so committed to this, because I just really think that we have this opportunity, but it's a window now. We had 40 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years. We're here, generation. So let's just get on with it.
Just going back to people calling for your resignation, I don't think you really have to worry unless that person is Justin Trudeau.
I know, that's good.
Yeah,
that's
okay,
good.
well, just a little pro tip.
Marlo, my chief, has he said anything yet? No, okay, we're good for now.
Are we going to meet our Paris targets?
We're going to meet our Paris targets.
How?
Well, we've already laid out a number of the measures. But the one thing that's going to make it really hard, let's just be 100% clear, is when provincial governments backtrack on what they've said they're going to do. So Ontario, I know you've heard the minister. We had a good meeting. We talked about lots of things. Zero plastic waste. I know lots of people here care about that. Working on that. Great Lakes. Lots of things we can do. But when the Ontario government, besides causing havoc for business and for municipalities, university schools, hospitals, all that had these programs, energy efficiency, saving money, reinvesting into people, patients, students, they've increased the emissions by 1/3. That's a lot. That's 1/3 all of Canada now needs to do. And so I'm absolutely committed, and I'm convinced we will. We've already mapped out a bunch of the measures. We're getting the largest reduction ever in Canada's history. We've got more work to do. But we know that zero plastic waste, we've modeled, we'll get more emissions reductions there. The innovation piece, we're going to get more reductions there. All the investments we're making in public transit and green infrastructure, we'll get the investments there. But, we have to continue to work, and we need to work together. And that is critically important. That's why I hope tomorrow's meeting, that climate change isn't just a nice thing to have in the discussion. 195 countries in the world said we got to get together. We got the Paris Agreement. Everyone worked really hard, and now every country is called to implement. That's including Canada. And back to, if you were a business and you had your board getting together, and you didn't talk about the biggest economic risk to your business, and you didn't talk about the biggest economic opportunity, you would say that was the worst board meeting ever. And so I'm hoping that there will be a conversation. We need a conversation also about Alberta getting resources to market. That's critically important. This is a transition. We're not transitioning overnight. And Alberta has taken very serious climate measures, which are great. But they need to get their resources to market. And we have invested in TMX, and we are committed to a proper process. But we still need to talk about climate change and the opportunity of clean growth.
You mentioned the First Minister's meeting starting tomorrow, and by all accounts, what I've been reading in the past couple of hours, it may be the shortest First Minister's meeting in Canadian history, because everybody's saying they're going to walk out of the thing. But when you take a look, and there was that famous picture on the cover of Maclean's magazine, sort of looked like The Sopranos, but it was the resistance. When you came in, you had virtually all the provinces, save for one. That was Saskatchewan, Brad Wall, who was opposed to what you want to do. Now it's switched the other way around. You've got a majority of the provinces who are saying that they're going to do everything they possibly can to stop the central part of your program from being implemented. They're going to take it to the Supreme Court, if the Supreme Court will hear the case. And I'm wondering what that does when you're talking about how we all have to pull together, but the political dynamic now is that it's all pulling apart, and that there is no agreement, that there's the political element, which is becoming very hot, especially in some election cycles that are coming up in Alberta and then federally after that. How do you overcome that?
Well, I mean, you hope you can, and you hope you can have rational conversations, which gets back to, I hope that there can be a good conversation at the table tomorrow. But look, we kind of live this in the US context with President Trump. You know, he took a very different approach. We tried really hard to make the business case, the jobs case for climate action, that US leadership was needed, that US had all these companies that were benefiting from the cleaner economy. Didn't work. And so what did we do? We went and worked directly with people that wanted to work together. So we have an agreement with the states representing almost 50% of the US economy. We are working with California, which isn't just a state, it's the 6th largest economy in the world. We're working with US businesses. We're working with US mayors. I was with the mayor of Houston. The mayor of Houston, you might think, you know, Houston, just oil and gas. No, he's like a leading climate champion. He sees that, you know, we're moving to a cleaner future. Yeah, sure, they're still relying on oil and gas, but he's part of this. So the goal is to work with people who want to get things done. And actually, it's interesting, when you look at your emissions, 40% are within the control of cities. So, you know, we're working with cities. Cities are on the front lines of climate change. Like when you have floods or droughts or extreme heat, or forest fires, who has to deal with it? Cities. And so they all want to work together. They need, you know, to work together to adapt to the impacts of climate change. They need the modeling to understand what the future is going to look like. So how they build, how they, you know, people get around is factored in. And they want to be part of the solution. So look, I'm going to continue working with everyone. And to be honest, we're working on a bunch of other things. You know, with Saskatchewan, always surprises people, but, you know, we're working with them on coal phase out. When I was in China, I had the Boundary Dam folks, carbon capture and storage. I was saying to China, you need this technology because you got a problem with coal. I just wish it was, I wish it was easier. I wish that sadly, it is the new generation of conservative politicians. That this was not what happened with George Bush Sr. This is not what happened with Brian Mulroney. This is not where Joe Clark is. That this is, unfortunately, for some reason, climate change has become this really strange issue where you should just look at it as a risk and an opportunity, as a health issue for your kids, jobs issue, growing your economy issue. But we don't have that frame. And that is really unfortunate because who are the losers? Everyone. All of us are losers. And I think everyone's sick of it. Like this whole fighting thing, it's unfortunate. And you know what? We're a great country. We're big in size. But in the world stage, we're not that big. We just aren't. We can punch above our weight. I think we sometimes do. We can be better. We can leverage our pension funds are doing amazing things, sustainable finance, the jobs, the businesses that I see around the world. We got to get our act together. And that's what I really, you know, that's why I try to, like, you know, have these conversations, talk to as many people as I can, go to different provinces, whether they like me or not. Like, you know, you got to go talk to people and also have real conversations, like honest conversations. And we were just talking about this. Our brain in risk, we really underestimate risk. And this is a really bad thing to underestimate risk on.
You mentioned the United States, and of course, Donald Trump has pulled out of the Paris Accords. And yet, when you read through the literature from the United Nations, the emissions of the United States have actually gone down by 1.2 or 1.3%. So it's not as if nothing is happening, and perhaps that's a more state-oriented result than anything else. Canada remains in the top 10 of greenhouse gas emitters in the world. I mean, I know there's an argument that says we're so small and we don't matter. Well, in fact, we're pretty robust in terms of where we are, not only on per capita, but in terms of total amount of output. But you brought up something interesting, and that is the international part, because greenhouse gases don't recognize national borders, obviously. And when you take a look at those numbers, at those graphs and charts that come out, you realize that India and China are continuing their upward march in terms of what they're putting into the air. So again, going back to all the nice talk and all the wonderful things that China says it's doing, it's actually compounding the problem second by second, minute by minute. How do you deal with that? And specifically, how do you deal with that domestically here in Canada when somebody says to you, listen, Minister, what the hell are you telling me that I've got to invest a lot of money to clean up my smokestack when China is opening up 5 new coal-fired plants every single day?
Someone gave me a good analogy. You go to McDonald's drive-thru, get your McDonald's, eat your McDonald's, and you just throw it out the window. You say, why is someone mad? Like someone stops you and says, well, why did you throw your McDonald's out the window? Like, that's not very cool. And then you say, well, you know, I'm 0.0000001% of the garbage. So why do you care? This is a terrible argument. No, like, that's a terrible, terrible argument. I could give you the health case. I just gave you the health benefits in Ontario when you got out of coal. So you would do that anyway, because pollution has a huge impact in terms of the number of people it kills. But also, we all are part of this. Imagine you're a country like Canada, who has benefited from fossil fuels. We've all benefited. And you're saying, too bad, we're not going to do anything. You go do it. It's not going to work, folks. That's not how the world works. That's not how the international system works. That's not what leadership looks like. And I've already said the economic case. I'm not going to go on why there's an economic case. It's like free trade. Some people don't want to believe free trade is good. I actually really believe free trade is good. So if you think that there's an economic opportunity to tackle climate change, there's that. We need to be there. We need to be credible. And by the way, that's what the Paris Agreement was. And everyone in the House of Commons, save one Conservative member of Parliament, voted to support the Paris Agreement. That meant that every country had to do their part. They had to have a target, and they had to achieve it. And then every 5 years, everyone has to be more ambitious. That's the deal. So this thing that, too bad, why should we do it? We're a huge emitter per capita. Huge. But if you look at that, we're one of the top in the world. And I'll say on China. So China is working really hard. They are, yes, coal is a huge issue, and that's partly it's the pollution issue has been a large driver. But they also see the huge economic opportunity. Do you know in the last few years, they've gone from 500,000 electric vehicles to 1.5 million. I don't need to tell you about what a leader they are in solar. That, when I go there, they're disrupting, so many areas, transportation, just across the board. I have had conversations with my Chinese counterpart. I was just in China a few months ago. And I said, Belt and Road has to be green. So they're making all of these investments, infrastructure investments. We cannot go have China, and they are taking action at home, but take action on home and then at the same time export emissions by building coal. We can't do that. But they have a huge opportunity to be a leader and, support renewables. But it is hard. Look, it's hard for every country. I don't need to tell you that. You look in the papers and you can see what's going on in different countries who are trying to take climate action. But once again, it's because of the short-termism and also politics. But sometimes politics actually just requires leadership. It requires looking past the next election. And I'm really in politics, and I know everyone says this, and maybe it's true, but I don't know how people get to the different outcomes. But I'm in politics because I want to make a difference. This isn't like the easiest job, but I really believe in Canada. I really believe in public service. I really believe in building a country and tackling the big challenges we have. And so that's why we have to do this. And you know what? I think Canada has an opportunity to show the world, as I said before, this is how you can transition to a cleaner future. It doesn't happen overnight. You don't shut everything down, but you figure out how you move forward, how you create opportunities, how you create jobs, how you create businesses, and how what we do, what we want to give to our kids and grandkids.
Well, I certainly believe in honoring commitments and promises, and I made everybody a promise that we'd be walking out the door at 1:30. So if you all would just adjust your watches, we can meet that target. Catherine McKenna, thank you very much.
Awesome.
A long, good conversation. Thanks.
To give the thank you remarks, we're going to invite John Mullally, who's the Vice President of Government Relations and Energy and Everything at Goldcorp. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. Thanks very much. Well, thanks very much for that tremendous conversation, Tom and Minister McKenna. I think we can all agree that maybe no drama, Minister McKenna, but lots of passion for the subject matter here at hand. So we certainly all felt that. And a true Canadian champ in terms of fighting climate change. Wish you all the best at COP24 upcoming. In fact, the minister does say, in terms of, as she referenced, her job isn't that easy, and she says that COP24, the negotiations can in fact go on all night. So this is not United Nations tourism or anything like that. So I understand you guys are really going for it. So good luck with that. You've also frequently stressed that environmental initiatives make economic sense. We heard that today, that pricing carbon will induce more investment in clean technology and lead to opportunities for many Canadians. And so some of our investments at Gold Corp, we're moving ahead. I've got a couple colleagues from our Coffee Gold project in the Yukon with a project, and it's the largest investment in the Yukon. We're working in other communities like Red Lake and Thunder Bay, Timmins, Roy-Noranda, 26 First Nations across the country as well. We're also making a significant investment in Timmins called the Century Project. I have my colleague Graham Johnson with me here today and Stephanie Thibault. That's a $1.4 billion investment in Timmins. So we're clearly perpetuating our operations and continuing to employ in northern and remote communities. So we're really proud of that work, and competitiveness and regulatory certainty, the work that you've been doing on the Impact Assessment Act. These are issues that we're watching very, very closely, and we're absolutely looking and continuing to invest in Canada while sort of being an older industry, mining, and we're still on top of innovation and investing in that area as well. So you mentioned our Borden Gold project. We're extremely proud that this will be the first all-electric underground mine. So now Tom is glaring at me. You're adjusting your watches again, so I'm going to step aside, but I'm just going to say thanks again, Mr. McKenna, and thank you to the Empire Club for the opportunity to sponsor what was a wonderful luncheon. Thanks, Ken.
Okay, next week is our 16th event in September, our final event with the Honourable Ralph Goodale, colleague of Minister McKenna's, is speaking at the One King West, so please come, and there's some tickets available left for that. And then we start into the last part of the season. We'll start in January. We have some wonderful events there. We have an economic lunch at the beginning of January, and we have we have a couple of sports events coming up, so it's going to be a great season. I hope to see you all there. Happy New Year, everyone. Thank you.